All right, so here we go, Dyl. I hope things are going well, man. So, look, no apologies needed for moving on with today's session. I think sometimes, we've just got to. It's got to be life ready, and this is for you. This is not for anyone else. So we'll deliver it in a way that works with you, and hopefully this session has the same level of impact. We're actually going to talk a little bit about mindset today, and I know that from time to time your job is really quite difficult, man. So yeah, it's not in any way a slight. Sometimes you just need a bit of time to process things. So good call on just holding off on today's session, and hopefully you can watch it over the next couple of days. How are the sessions going? Let's do follow that up. I know that you've been putting a lot of work in, and at about week 6 now, we need to make sure that that ball keeps on rolling. Remember, the fat loss will not be linear. You're going to go through periods where it comes off. You're going to go through periods where it's a bit tougher. And now is the chance to just keep pushing that ball on, keep it moving while the momentum's already there. So let's get into today's session. I'm going to do my screen share as normal, and hopefully I can pull up. Here we go. So pull up the session for today. Go to full screen, and here we are. So we're going to be talking a little bit about fostering motivation and setting goals. We have actually touched on this a fair bit between you and I personally over the last few weeks because it's something that you've asked a little bit about. Before we go into it, let's just do a quick recap on last week. We were talking about different food substitutions, but what I actually did want to show you is something I showed the group last week on what my daily eating pattern looks like. So the reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to give you some sort of context in how I eat so that potentially you can see how closely it aligns what I'm recommending, because what I recommend is what I do. So how aligned is this? So we're building in this morning fasting up until midday. I generally have 3 cups of coffee in that period, maybe even a fourth. From when I get up at 5 o'clock right through till 12 o'clock. And that's my fasting window. Remember, the aim for that is to get into fat burning zone, because the moment you eat, you become anabolic, which means you go into storage mode. So particularly if this is a fairly high carbohydrate meal, your insulin level is going to come up, and what that's going to do is put you into that storage mode. Release of insulin is a signal that you want to go into storage mode, which is one of the reasons why I don't eat a huge amount of carbohydrates in that first meal. So what this is here is 6 egg whites only with a big blob of low-fat cottage cheese. And then at the same time, or half an hour later, I'll get in some healthy fats, avocado, tuna, drained right down, and get all the oil out of it, and then some black rice. So what that does is gets in my plenty of protein in one whack. Then at about 2:30, I'll get in something like a snack like this guy, by bar counters, and probably another coffee. Moving along to 4 to 6 p.m. Depending on how hungry I am, I might get another snack in, something like this or a banana, just something to kind of tie me over to dinner, particularly if I've got some calls on where dinner's going to be pushed back to 7:30, or that I've got a training session on where I'm going to be hungry and I want to fuel that training session. Sometimes what I'll do is bring in a bar counter bar or something like this where you've got just some tomato and cheese, avocado, and a rice cracker, something simple like that. Now, getting to my dinner meal, this is a really important meal. I think the dinner meal is the most important meal of the day, particularly if you're going to be doing fasting, because it's going to lead into your fast. So it's really important that this meal contains a good whack of the good stuff. The good stuff being a nice amount of lean protein. In this case, it's the steak. You've got your low GI carbohydrates here, and you've got just some essentially wok fried greens. That is such a typical meal for me. And as you'll notice there, it's all whole foods, isn't it? So no packaged garbage. It's all whole foods. Like I keep prosecuting here, fasting plus whole foods is the best way to lose weight if combined with a good gym program. And down here, maybe a little, usually not both, but a little scoop of one or the other to go with a nighttime green tea or something like that. I think this is a picture of how you should be eating. So I'd ask you the question, man, how does your eating compare to that? Does it look similar? Because remember what's happening, the further you get away from that, the cybernetic mechanism is trying to kick in and pull you away from the course that you are currently on. And Dyl, Even though it's been a tough day, I just want you to remember something important, right? That tough day is not going to crack your resilience. Right? It's not going to crack your resilience. If you let it crack your resilience before your habitual program's been replaced, and you start making excuses with these things, you end up back at destination fat man. And I know with you, that's definitely not the case. You've just got to get back on the horse tomorrow morning, have a bevy or two tonight, get back on the horse tomorrow morning, back in the gym, back in the healthy behaviors. Remember, it's all about the 80-20 rule. If 80% of the time it's great, you've nailed it. So let's keep moving on. This just a quick reminder, this is the equation on the nutrition side of fat loss. Fasting plus whole foods equals fat loss. And I know you're all across that one, man. So remember last week we talked about some substitutions. How did you go with those substitutions? Did you put any of them in place? I did email you a copy of obviously the session notes, but then I also gave you 13 or 14 examples that we talked about in the sessions. The aim of those substitutions, Dyl, and I know that you know what you're doing here, is to get less calories in, a better type of calories, such as more protein, or generally make the insulin spike less prominent by bringing in lower GI foods. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks' time. And obviously the overall benefit is that we want to get the calories we burn weighing more than the calories we eat, because this is what causes weight gain. So let's keep moving on. Still recapping from last week, we talked about the difference in the bad, so where the bad comes from. High in sugar sources, high in fat sources. We talked about these, and then we talked about in the next one, what is the good? Remember, this is the way I'd pretty much summarize this, Dyl. As many herbs and spices as you want. They don't contain calories, so you're good to go there. Then your mustards are the way forward, your vinegars or your salty sauces. So mustards, vinegars, and salty sauces, along with any herbs and spices. Adding them rather than pre-made, thick, sugary, or creamy sauces is A grade. You're going to be all over it. Cool? So today's session, man, we're going to talk a little bit about, about motivation, goal setting, and this is going to be a good session. I'd suggest potentially maybe watch this session twice over because it will help. It will definitely help. So we're going to talk about what motivation actually is. We're going to talk about the do something principle. We've talked about this in previous weeks. We're going to also talk about goals and visions and creating your goals and visions in the right framework. Let's go. If only I could just get motivated. Man, the amount of times I hear this a week, if only I could just get motivated to do, insert whatever it is, eat healthy, be a better lover, go to the gym, whatever it is. You know, people think of this as the holy grail, almost as if motivation is something you can catch, and then when you caught it, you've got it forever. It doesn't work like that, mate. It doesn't work like that. It's not a thing, it's a state. And when you get practiced at developing or fostering motivation, you become almost like a superhero, and people look at you and go, what the fuck is this guy on? Right? And it's not that you've caught something, it's that you know how to foster or develop something. Now that motivation comes from two primary sources. One are extrinsic or external motivators. They are what they sound like. The driving force is an external factor to you. Carrot and stick style motivation, as in you do this, you get this reward, you do this, you get naughtied, is an example of external motivator. Now, it doesn't have to be carrot and stick. It could be partner encouragement or criticism. That's an example of something that's coming from outside of you, correct? Then we've got our intrinsic motivators. Our intrinsic motivators are obviously ones that originate from within us. Have you, Dyl, started to enjoy the actual process of going to a gym now? Have you started to enjoy the challenge of eating healthier on a daily basis or overcoming challenges? You see, the enjoyment of the process in itself becomes the motivation. So a good question to ask really is, which one is best? External or internal motivation? Which one's best? Well, I think this is a good way to view it. At the moment, what we're trying to do, Dill, is get our habitual programs, our good practices to go from being a conscious effort to something that we do habitually. Yeah? Like going to the gym. At the moment, it's probably a conscious, I have to go to the gym. Eventually, with repetition, it will get to the point where you just go. That's what you do. Now, at the start, we don't really necessarily have a goal in mind, and our habit is absent because we haven't been doing that. Now, in these circumstances, and this is the place for most people starting, is external motivators are a good way to get started. Now, an example of this is if you worked in a sales company, you might find that to get started in your new sales role, putting on a fantastic commission opportunity is the best way to get you started. You may have found that at the start it was your wife that was pushing you along and that got you started. Or maybe it was criticism that pushed you along and maybe that's what got you started. And external motivators are really, really good for getting the ball rolling at the start. But eventually, they die down. Your fans stop telling you you're looking greater and greater and greater because they're too busy with their own lives. What you need to continue, Dill, is the internal motivation being fostered. And when you get to this point, you start to hit your goals, and this is where the habit starts to be formed. So what's an example of an internal motivation? Remember, it's being involved in the process and getting enjoyment from the actual process rather than doing it for someone else. Let's investigate this just a little bit further. I see something we call the shiny object syndrome. So the shiny object syndrome, what that actually is it's this idea of people flip-flopping between the newest fad diet, the newest program, whether it's F45 or bar or whatever it is. It's such a common thing. People have a lack of focus and they get distracted. And the new shiny thing comes up and guess what? They leap to that. Already, Dill, 6 weeks in when I'm doing my group program, I can tell that a couple of the guys are already looking for the newest supplement. They're looking for the newest fat burning tablet. And there's nothing wrong with making sure that you're giving yourself the best chance of winning, but it's also the mentality that's involved in that. They're looking for a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet to be found other than for me to tell you that the way to get here is through repetition of the same stuff, because everything new eventually gets old and then requires hard work. You see, we are primed to hate the things that are hard, correct? And so what happens is we get to this point called the dip, where the novelty wears off, the bright shiny object starts to dim. Now, there's no way to conquer this other than to know, Dill, that the first step in all of this, as we know, is that magical A word, awareness. Having the awareness to know that the bright shiny light will eventually dim. It will dim. This program will dim. The calls will dim. But if you've got the awareness up front to know that that is coming, then you are better able to remember that the only way for you to continue this on through is to find internal motivation. The external stuff will wear off. Why are you doing this? What is the internal motivation that's going to keep you going? In fact, here's an example that I came across, which is that drug addicts that enter rehab. In fact, the coaches or the counselors know from day one who the people are that are eventually going to get out of rehab. And the people that I identify as being the ones that are going to get out of rehab are the ones that are doing it for themselves. They're not doing it for their daughter. They're doing it for themselves. Fear of losing myself, dying without dignity. These are internal motivators that arise from yourself. And for you, man, what you need to do is make sure that as much as you're getting these results, maybe a kilo a week or whatever that we've been losing, that's great results. You need to make sure that this intrinsic or external motivation is being fostered within. And we can talk a bit more about how to actually do that. So I really love this model here. It's called the comfort zone model. And the facts are, it's this level of comfort, it represents security, right? So it's much easier for you now. And take the example of you just having a beer this afternoon. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have done that, right? That's one way to cope. But it's easier for you to stay in that comfort zone than it is to do something different and uncomfortable, such as going to the gym to deal with that negative energy. As an example, right? Now, I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying that this is habitual. And I hope you don't take offense to that, because you have said to me prior that that's one of the things that you wanted to change. Again, I'm not criticizing, just pointing out. You see, misery loves company, and it's also best mates with comfort. It is easier to stay where we are and keep doing the same thing and getting the same results than it is to actually seek discomfort. Have a look at this. This is the zone that we want to be here. So things like learning to cook, learning to do weights. Do you remember back? I remember having the conversation right back when you started this and how nervous you were about going back into the gym. And obviously you just had your ops done. And now look at you, man. You're going in there every day and flogging it. That's because in the discomfort zone, you learn, you expand your horizons. And whether it, look at what the next opportunity is for you. Is it meditation? Is it affirmations? What is it? What can we eat up more? Seek the discomfort. Acknowledge that fear. Kick it in the balls. So I have this quote, and I love this quote. Motivation. Those waiting for motivation to show never show. Right? Those waiting for motivation to show never show. Those waiting for motivation die early, full of potential. Sink that one in for a little bit. So we've spoken about this before, right? So let's just quick recap. This kind of goes hand in hand with the 5-second rule. This is the practical application of the 5-second rule. How we typically view motivation is as something that we get. It's something that we get. How long were you thinking about doing something? I think you said to me about a year, correct? And generally, this is the way that happens. You've been waiting around for a moment of inspiration. Now, whether that inspiration was a negative thing or a positive thing, you weren't able to move to the next step for approximately a year. Now, I don't know what it was that was the catalyst for you deciding to act, but essentially you'd standing still, trying to wait for the inspiration to happen before you move on to becoming motivated enough to then take action and then start to get results. Now, had we had a way, Dyl, of 12 months ago plus the 6 weeks of getting you into that action mode earlier, we could have been, 10, 12 kilos. We could have been at our goal weight a long time ago. But this is how we all view motivation. We need the inspiration to cause the motivation, to cause the action, to then cause the results. It's kind of like push starting your car. You can't get going until you've got enough force behind you to be able to choke the engine and get it to kick over. It's a very similar thing. Now, I'm not sure if you've come across this book or I've shared with this book before. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and it is one of the best books that I've come across. And the gentleman who writes it, named Mark Manson, who's quite a famous blogger, what his suggestion is that motivation is temporary, meaning it's only sticking around for a while, and it's temperamental, meaning that it's open to being impacted upon by different things. One day it's up, one day it's down. His key point is that motivation must be fostered, not fabricated. you can't just wake up and say, okay, hopefully this is a motivating day. You've got to go out and actively foster that motivation. But this is such a key point. To acknowledge that motivation is the result of taking action, not the start point. See here, action is the result of motivation. In this model, action is the start point. You take action, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take action. Guess what? You get some initial results. Those initial results may not be massive, but they'll be results in some form. It might be that your action was to put your shoes on, and the result was that you walked to the car to get in the car to go to the gym. That's an example. And then what happens is a funny thing. By simply taking action, you go into a motivated state. And an example might be, you just might be sitting on the lounge and procrastinating and thinking, oh man, looking for that inspiration, because that's how we think it works, to get the motivation to get up and go to the gym. So what could you do? Well, of course, we know that our action step is to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and bang, guess what? We go into action mode now, which causes the results. We put on a pair of shoes, we walk to the car, and guess what? You go into a motivated, and what happens is when you get into that motivated state, all of a sudden it becomes a positive loop, and this happens. So we start at action, we get into results, causes motivation, causes further inspiration, and then because we've got that inspiration, we want to do more action, and it becomes cyclical or a continuous loop. I think Steve Jobs said this incredibly well. You can't connect the dots looking forward. When you're sitting there on the couch, it's pretty hard to see yourself at the gym in an hour's time, working out and getting really sweaty. But all of a sudden, how often do we complete something, look back and think, wow, that was actually a lot easier than I thought. You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backward. You have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. And you do that by just taking action. And an example might be that you're working in a practical sense, in a business sense, you're working on a really difficult thing that you've been procrastinating for a long time, a task at work, whether it's writing a paper or something you don't want to do. So what do? You 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you open up a Word document and you write the title. And the very writing of the title puts you into action mode. That in itself is a result which causes you to start writing the table of contents, etc., etc., etc. And then it becomes cyclical. This is something that most people don't know, but when you realize that it's about doing something, taking an action or any action causes momentum. And it's like the wheel here, the ferret wheel, right? And once the ball starts rolling and the ferret wheel starts spinning, guess what? All of a sudden, things become a lot easier. This is definitely a mindset change. So rather than sitting around waiting for something to happen, what we want to start doing is going action. What action can I take? The action's not actually that important. It's the fact that you're taking the action. Let's keep moving on. So when we're tackling a challenge, we've got to think about how do we go about this. Now let's just take a challenge such as you decided that you were going to climb Everest. How would you climb Everest? How would you climb Everest? Well, I think the only answer to that question is one step at a time, right? How else do you break down a challenge as big as climbing Everest? You see, many of us look from the base up to our goals and think, fuck, how am I going to get there? For you, it might be to get to your goal weight, and it feels so far away, right? So what's the answer? This key here, reduction to the ridiculous. This is a technique that I've used for many years to break down people's goals into smaller bite-sized chunks. It's called reduction to the ridiculous. Let's have a look at how it works. So let's just say you needed to save up $2,000 for a loan. That sounds like a lot of money, right? Or what if we break it down, reduction to the ridiculous, into 20 weeks of $100 or 100 weeks of $20? All of a sudden, does that seem more digestible? So what about the fact that it's 4 weeks until your holiday and you're like, oh man, I really want to get on holidays. Fuck, it's so far away. Or it's only 28-hour shifts, right? No time for the gym. All we're looking for is 4 to 5 hours a week. That's it. 4 to 5 hours. Struggling to do HIIT. It's only 10, 20-second sprints. That's it. Need to lose 50 kilos? Well, if you've got a year, that's 1 kilo a week for 50 weeks. All of a sudden, through the technique of reduction to the ridiculous, things become a lot more digestible. I think this is the key, isn't it? Goals, goals, goals. No goals, no direction. It's just really hitting and hoping. Dyl, what are you trying to achieve? What is your goal weight? Because realistically, unless we have clarity on exactly what that is, we're just really leaving in the morning in our car, driving out, and just driving around in circles. Does that make sense? So awareness is the first step. It's all within your reach if you want it, but the first step is to have the awareness and the clarity to know exactly what you're after. I mean, I've showed this to you before, right? And you've developed your own one. It was so good to see that, man. I loved seeing that. Have clarity in what it is that you actually want. So I'll give you an example here of what I mean by having clarity, because this body transformation is a science. There's no luck about this. Some people have maybe slightly better genetics than others, but let me give you the science here. You don't need to count calories, but let's just say we wanted to. A half a kilo of body fat contains about 3,750 calories. Okay, that's how many calories it contains. So if you wanted to lose half a kilo of body fat per week, which is generally considered safe guidelines, well then you effectively need to just take that amount, because that's what we're going to want to get rid of, and we want to cut that off the diet over the period of 7 days. So we take the 3,750 divided by 7 and we get 535 calories. If you create that deficit per day through improved eating or increased exercise, the science says you will lose weight. In fact, check this out. An 80 kilo, 30-year-old moderately active bloke requires 2,700 calories a day, roughly, give or take, depending on how active they are. So if all of a sudden we took that deficit, that 500 calorie deficit, and just removed that from the 2,700 and we started eating 2,165, you will lose weight. 500 calories, 4 bottles of beer. Chop out 4 bottles of beer a day or whatever it is that's contributing that extra 500 calories that you don't need, and all of a sudden the fat starts to fall off. That's science. It doesn't happen in a linear fashion because the body's adaptive. It tries to hold on to it, but nonetheless, it is science. Let's keep moving on. So here's why this is the right plan, Dyl. Because in a dieting plan, the practices are not sustainable. Nothing is learned. You don't learn anything. You and I have spent countless amounts of hours over the last few weeks learning. We're no changing our psychology in the normal dieting plan. There's no look towards changing our coding. For us, it's the opposite. It's not all or nothing. It's not silver bullet. We adopt an 80-20 approach. We're learning about health when realizing that knowledge is power. And most importantly, we're recognizing that awareness and the habitual program are our starting steps. We get them right, everything else gets easier. And you know what? The fear doesn't go away, man. The cybernetic mechanism is strong and will always try to pull you back. But you got to bust through that terror barrier. Last few slides, Dyl, and I think this is a really good way to picture it. Get some clarity over the next week about what your big rock is. Your Mount Everest. What is it? Is it 80 kilos? Is it something else? Is it being able to run a marathon? What is your big rock? And if we break that down into the fat loss 4 that we covered in week 1, nutrition, activity, lifestyle, and your coding or your habitual program, we can set goals around these stepping stones. So the big rock is that thing that you want. The stepping stones are the strategies or goals along the way that get you there. So let's break that down. We get a 3-step plan. This is how we construct it using SMART goals. We can talk about these in a bit more detail, but it just means adding detail to your goal. 1, identify what your big rock is. What is it that you're going after? 2, identify the stepping stones, the required strategies, and then make those SMART, make those specific, make them measurable, make sure they're achievable and realistic, and put a time bound on them to make sure that to make sure that our strategy goals or our stepping stones feed our big rock. I'd like to talk to you about these in a bit more detail, but for the average person wanting to change the way they look, I'm going to list it all out for you right here. Now, this isn't your big rock, but let's just talk in general terms. Let's say the big rock was to be, I want to be under 100 kilos body weight and 100 centimeters waist circumference within the next 6 months. Is that realistic? Yeah, well, it depends where you're coming from, but for the average person, yes, that's realistic. So then our stepping stones, we look towards the 4 pillars. Nutrition. Now, feel free to copy this, Dyl, because if you copy this, this will work. This is how I would go about doing this. I would give up all soft drink by the end of the week. Swap it over to water, 2 liters a day. I'll eat at home a minimum of 5 nights a week, because when you eat at home, you control what goes in your food. I will commence intermittent fasting on 5 days a week. I'll do the 8 p.m. till midday fast. They're the 3 nutrition strategies that I would predominantly use. Next, pillar 2, physical activity. What do we do there? What are the strategy goals there? I'll complete the 3-day split construct. You're doing the 4, right? So you're going 1 ahead. I'll complete a minimum of 2 HIIT sessions per week. That's it. Let's keep moving. What about the other side? Lifestyle. I'll cut out all midweek drinking for the next 3 months, commencing Monday. I don't drink midweek unless it's special occasion anymore. I'll be in bed by 9:30, commencing immediately for all weekdays to make sure that I'm not putting any barriers in there which are going to stop me from moving towards this big rock that I want. And the 4th one, habitual program. I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes I wake and the first 10 minutes before I go to sleep on priming my brain, getting it into the sleep mode and starting the day on the affirmation mode to make sure that your brain is wired and it's starting to code itself the right way to make the right decisions to make this all habitual. Does this make sense, Dyl? Hopefully so. You know, putting your goals to work on paper is really, really helpful. It's confronting because it gets you to do something that you don't traditionally do, you're not comfortable with. Write them down, look at them daily, put them where you see them, on a wall or in your wallet, or have a little gold card in your wallet, something that you can do like you have with your vision board, something that reminds you what it is that you're trying to go out and achieve. So, Dyl, lots of information there in this one today, and I know it was quite a difficult sort of day for you, so I don't want to carry this on too long, but look, the key things to take out today are breaking your goals down into your big rock down into strategies is really going to help, right? Because to look at the bottom of Everest and look up and go, wow, it's quite daunting. Now, let's just say you want to lose 10 kilos. If you've got 20 weeks to do it, we could be looking at half a kilo a week. As long as that trend line is going the general direction, what's going to happen is in 10 to 20 weeks' time, you're going to look back and it's all going to make sense. But from where you're standing right now, it seems like a big mountain to climb, right? So next week, what we're going to talk about is how to develop the grit and mental stability to keep it going. How do you become harder and more mentally tough? So there we are today, man. Hope you had a good time watching the session, and please comment me some questions. Let's start a chat tomorrow or over the weekend so that we can pick up and make sure that the concepts of this one were pulled. And I'll also send you the meeting notes, so the session notes, so that you've got them all handy and you can review those as well. You're awesome, Dyl. Good things are happening, man. So we'll chat soon, right?